It's the Companions of Quennel, and you better remember that name, because after the Potion of Speed update, this is now the strongest heavy cavalry unit in Total War Warhammer 2, but not just in their class. Brettonia now has an answer to monstrous cavalry, to constructs, to monsters, and everything in between. This questing knight regiment of renown Thanos snaps large units out of existence, like Clan Eshin in the Shadow and the Blade. Now, all that changed recently for them was a relatively innocuous line in the patch notes that dropped on December 9th. Plus 10 bonus versus large, plus 100 cost. And I will readily admit, I had no idea the impact that buff would have. I mean, I knew it would make them better in combat, obviously, but I wasn't entirely sold on Brettonia getting yet another 1500 gold heavy cav unit. Before this patch, the Companions of Quennel were literally just a questing knight unit with high AP values, the Blessing of the Lady, and 25% fire resist. No doubt, their stat line and immune to psych made them useful in some matchups, but that plus 10 bonus versus large, which increases their melee attack by 10 and their weapon strength by 10 when fighting cav or monsters, has turned them into world beaters, the likes of which we have not seen for an age. And what makes them so special now is their unique combination of huge weapon strength, amazing damage split that heavily favors AP, their 20% physical resist, and high model count, now combined with that plus 10 bonus versus large. And high model count, generally speaking, isn't always a good thing. The lower the model count, the more HP per model, makes it much more difficult to bleed models and therefore lose combat effectiveness. But the companion stat line is so ridiculous, and there are so many of them, double the model count of units like demigryph knights with halberds, 45 as opposed to 24, they can gang up on single targets and cut through armored cav faster than any other unit in the game. But don't take my word for it, let's do some testing. So, for this video, I gathered up one of the best players in the world right now, if not the best, your boy Falcon, to get his perspective and do some unit testing with the strongest heavy knights and monsters in Warhammer 2. Talking about Dread Knights, Horned Ones, Dragon Princes, Blood Knights, even Fimir, the cream of the crop when it comes to mobile armor and bonus versus large. And the results we found were shocking, to say the least. And the obvious test to get things kicked off was to match them up against the infamous demigryph knights with halberds. These are the premier monstrous cavalry in Warhammer 2, at least until we get Mournfangs, Rhinox, and Skullcrushers of Khorne. Demis have a significantly worse stat line in terms of melee attack and defense, but 25 bonus versus large, more weapon strength, and 45 more armor. And that armor value of 125 is a huge deal. It's what gives Demis a big leg up in those head-on and head engagements, where their contemporaries like Grail Knights and Blood Knights don't have the AP values to easily slice through them. But what we noticed early on is that Companions seem to have the best AP ratio in the entire game for heavy cav, bar none. 75% AP split for them, compared to 66% for Horned Ones, 70% for Knights of the Ebon Claw, and 67% for demigryph knights with halberds. And so in this particular test, against a unit that costs the exact same as they do at 1500 gold, the Companions utterly demolished the demigryph knights. Clean sweep, did not lose a single engagement, and in many of them, still had more than half the unit online and functioning. Pretty decisive, but what happens when we talk about the Royal Altar of Gryphites, a unit that at 1850 gold is the most expensive monstrous cavalry unit in Warhammer 2, and has long held the crown of the most powerful melee cav killer in the game? Well, their terror won't do anything. Companions are immune to psych, but they have 10 better leadership than regular demis, means they'll stick around and fight for longer, and significantly better melee attack and melee defense than normal demis as well, because of their rank 9 bonus. Surely, this unit will perform well and maybe even outright win. Maybe not. Off the charge, they trade pretty evenly, but immediately after impact, the Altar of Gryphites start getting surrounded, fighting 1v2 and 1v3 engagements on a per model basis, and it quickly snowballs out of control from there. The Companions have that huge AP value, and it essentially nullifies one of the Demi's biggest advantages, their armor. And just like normal Demi halberds, the Royal Altar of Gryphites end up losing 10 out of 10 engagements. It's not even close, yet another clean sweep. But let's take a look at Horned Ones. They have almost 400 more HP than the Questing Knight ROR, and they have a big leg up in one of the weapon strength categories as well, with 60 compared to 48. Rampage has very little of a negative effect here, honestly, it hasn't had much of an effect since the HP threshold was changed, really. Rampage is no longer much of a detriment to Cold 1 units at all, because it activates at 20% HP, a time when these units are typically going to be routing anyway, and so we're not going to have to worry about the Rampage in any way, shape, or form at this point. But the charge comes in, and again, a pretty even trade at the start. Companions do not have a particularly impressive charge bonus, but here, the melee defense is what fails the Horned ones. With 16 less melee defense, they just get hit too often. Their armor value of 100 isn't much help. We saw Demis at 125 wasn't good enough. 100 certainly won't cut it, and it is yet another clean sweep for Brettonia. Okay, so up to this point, the Companions of Quenelle have not lost a single engagement, which is pretty crazy. Knights of the Ebon Claw Dread Knights, much the same, but their issue is the Cold 1 curse. They have more than 1,000 HP less than Horned ones, 700 less than Companions, not even counting their 20% physical resist. Their stat line of 49 attack, 52 defense is completely bananas, one of the best in the game, and it goes even further into the stratosphere once Murderous Mastery pops for them, but they don't have the health pool to trade blow for blow in this fight, and in fact, in testing, they don't even kill enough Companions in time to activate Murderous Mastery in the first place before they're running for the hills. So it's not a great showing here. They get bulldozed, completely, utterly, don't win a single fight, ends up being one of the most lopsided tests yet. And that's a big blow to the Dark Elves in the Brettonia matchup, honestly, because previously, the Knights of the Ebon Claw saw some competitive play here. They're one of the best counters to the mobility advantage Britons typically enjoy against the Elves. And Brettonia, I don't think is considered one of the best multiplayer factions in the game right now, probably not from the campaign perspective either, but they do match up very well against the Dark Elves, High Elves, and Wood Elves and have a significant advantage at least 2 out of those 3 matchups. The fact that they now beat the crap out of the Ebon Claw units, pretty big deal. But the Fireborn Dragon Prince's Regiment of Renown were a unit I was really excited to test, because their stat line is just stupid good. They're the tankiest knight unit in Mortal Empires, bar none, 20% physical resist, 53 attack, 50 defense base, then they get up to 71 melee attack against enemy cavalry with their 18 bonus versus large, which I believe is the highest melee attack value of any cav unit in Warhammer, period. And just for that little cherry on top, cool and casual 80 charge bonus. No big deal. But they've got a price tag to match it at 1850 gold, 350 more than the Companions, same as the Royal Altar of Griffites. But remember, their stat line revolves around Martial Mastery, that +8 melee attack and +12 melee defense when their health is above 50%. They're going to lose those stats once they drop below half, and they deal flaming damage, where the Companions have 25% flame resist, so immediately their damage is cut down by a fourth in a head-on-head fight. The Fireborn take a lead off the charge, as expected. They do very well in the front half of combat, but as soon as their Martial Mastery is lost, they run out of gas and get their salad tossed hard. 10-0 for the Companions of Quenelle, again. But fear not, Undead Champions have entered the chat, and there's finally a unit that can actually do something in this matchup. And it has been a constant battle in the fluff, figuring out who is truly better, the Knights of Zaladi or the Knights of Bloodkeep. And normally the comparison is between Grail Knights and Blood Knights, but as we've already shown, the Companions' cav killing potential blows Grail Knights out of the water. They just don't have the AP values to do half as well in some of these fights as the Questing Knight ROR. But ironically, Grail Knights are better at killing infantry, so we're in a Twilight Zone where Questing Knights deal better with cav than bonus for large Grails, and bonus for large Grails do better than Questing Knights at killing infantry. But the Blood Knights have some advantages in this particular head-on-head fight. They don't break, they just crumble, which is objectively better than routing. Empirical data and testing has already proven that. I'm not going to go into it here, not the point of the video, just trust me. They are the only elite knight unit that can resurrect models from the dead, which is obviously incredibly good, and their stat line is pretty absurd when Frenzy is active. Close to 80 charge bonus, 22 bonus for large, and they're going to stick in there and fight to the death. And they do very well off the charge, taking the lead early, outright winning in some cases, but again, once their leadership drops below 50% and they lose the buffs from Frenzy to their melee attack and weapon damage, they lose in the back half of the engagement. Kind of a common thread here. We tested it 20 times, the Blood Knights won 6 of those engagements, which up to that point was by far the most impressive of any of the units we tested. So at this point, I was talking with Falcon and saying, okay, look, heavy cav isn't cutting it. Monstrous cav isn't cutting it. We need to go up a weight class. Necro Knights and Sepulchral Stalkers weren't gonna do it. They lose convincingly to Demigryph Knights with Halberds, and we already saw how that went. So we turned our attention to the Chaos factions, Norska, the Beastmen, and the WOC. And now we're talking Dragon Ogres. This is like GSP fighting Alistair Overeem. They're not even in the same weight class. They've got 110 weapon strength, a similar AP split to the Questing Knights, 26 bonus versus large, and 2,200 more HP. Shouldn't be a fair fight, right? On paper, should be pretty one-sided. Right, it's not fair. For the Dragon Ogres, tested it 20 times, Companions won 14 of them. Dragon Ogres won 6, same as Blood Knights. Now, there is a caveat here, and that is that the Summoners of Rage will indeed beat the Companions of Kunel. The reason is that they have innate magical attacks to cut through that 20% physical resist, which has benefited them tremendously in all these fights, and they have a stat line even more impressive than regular Dragon Ogres. But the Summoners of Rage are 2,000 gold. That is 500 more gold more expensive. So pretty big difference in price there, 2,000 versus 1,500. We'll show some testing here at the end in the background with Fimir Great Weapons, the Miststalkers ROR, Minotaurs with Great Weapons, and the Butchers of Kalkengard ROR, and as you might expect, the Companions Raffle Stomp all of those fights as well, and I think in those two, they didn't lose a single engagement, which was really surprising, because Fimir are a big reason for the fact that the Brettonia matchup for Norska, or vice versa, the Norska matchup for Brettonia is so bad for Brettonia. I mean, they get kind of raffle stomped in that fight. Fimir are hard counters to stuff like Grail Knights because they have magical attacks, armor sundering, they side through the physical resist, and they have a ton of mass and AP as well. So they're super good, but the Companions of Kunel beat the brakes off them. Incredibly impressive. So, what we've got here is an ROR unit that with a simple plus 10 bonus versus large buff is now the best cav killer in the entire game for the price. And not just for the price, hands down, straight up. Not even a competition. Royal Altar of Gryphites, Dragon Ogres can't compete with them. They took everything we threw at them and gobbled them up for Thanksgiving dinner. What does this mean for Brettonia moving forward? Well, it's a huge buff, obviously. No other way to say it. These guys are murder machines, and one of the things they previously struggled with, most, Brettonia that is, was dealing with heavily armored anti-cav threats. It's now going to be much easier for them to deal with now that they have this unit. With that said, there are some obvious limitations here. The Companions of Kunel are a Regiment of Renown unit. You can only bring one of them. They can't be everywhere at once, and they're still going to get dumpstered by artillery, by the new and totally not OP Scourge Runner chariots, spells like Spirit Leech and Fate of Buna, and play that revolves around nets. They are overperforming for the cost for sure, maybe performing more like a 1,700 gold unit as opposed to a 1,500 gold unit, but they are capped, and there are still some pretty clear-cut counters. And of course, I'm not necessarily opposed to the Brettonians getting a new can opener in a role that was previously one they kind of struggled with. If Brettonia should be overperforming in any particular battlefield archetype, it should be in the cavalry department. From a lore perspective, from a tabletop perspective, this is exactly what Brettonia should thrive in. So now they have an absolute world beater in that role. I'm pretty okay with it. Board up your homes, hide your girls, hide your wives, stay away from open fields. By God, for the love of sweet baby Jesus, do not meet them on an open field, Ned. The Knights are back in town with a vengeance, and they're coming for that ass. Be afraid. Meow!